Ryan Clark has finally spoken after being fired by ESPN, and instead of attacking the network, he shared a heartfelt message that left fans and even some of his biggest critics looking at him differently. But there was one part of his statement that quickly became the biggest talking point. Let me break it down. Let's set the scene. Monday, NFL Live is on air. Ryan Clark is doing what he's done for over a decade, breaking down the league, giving his read on players and teams. The show goes to a commercial break, and when the cameras come back, he's not there. Clark was giving his usual analysis. The show went to a commercial break, and Clark never returned for the final 10 minutes. No explanation on air, nothing said to the audience, just an empty chair where Ryan Clark used to be. Nothing was said on air during the show, but Mina Kimes looked visibly uncomfortable, and news broke online immediately. Think about that for a second. The people in that studio knew something had just happened. The viewers at home didn't get a word of it. It just leaked out into the world in real time. Here's how ESPN explained itself afterward. ESPN's public response is that they planned to fire Clark on Tuesday morning, but the news leaked, and when they began receiving media inquiries for comment, they decided to let Clark know immediately so he wouldn't learn about it online. So the plan was to do it quietly, the next morning, off camera. That plan fell apart, and Ryan Clark ended up finding out he no longer had a job while he was sitting in the chair in front of the cameras doing the job. Andrew Marchand at The Athletic confirmed the same timeline. ESPN fired Ryan Clark as part of a round of layoffs, and Clark, who was on NFL Live on Monday, was informed about the layoff in the middle of the broadcast and did not finish the show. And it wasn't just him. Clark became the first high-profile victim of a round of layoffs that was reportedly set to take place on Tuesday. Now, ESPN and outlets like TMZ initially tried to frame this as something close to mutual, something calm. Clark wasn't having it. When a report claimed he wasn't forced off the broadcast, he responded directly. TMZ had claimed that Clark wasn't forced to leave the show during a commercial break, reporting that Clark was rattled by the news, and that both Ryan and ESPN agreed it was better not to return. Clark pushed back on that characterization point blank. In his own words, he described asking if he should be done for the day and getting told yes. "I wasn't forced, I asked, should I be done now?" he wrote, adding, "The answer was yes." That's not a mutual decision. That's a man being told to leave his own show. The financial context matters here too, because it explains why he was the one they didn't wait to tell privately. Clark was earning more than $2 million per year under his current contract, which was signed in February 2024. He wasn't some anonymous name buried on the depth chart of ESPN talent. He was one of the highest paid voices in the building, and the layoffs machine came for him first. And it wasn't a total shock to insiders. Rumors that Clark could be in danger of losing his job have been rumbling since the Super Bowl in February, even though Clark was reportedly expected to be part of ESPN's Super Bowl coverage next year, as the network airs the event for the first time. So there was already tension bubbling under the surface for months before that Monday broadcast, because it lays out exactly why a $2 million analyst became expendable, at a company still paying its biggest star an enormous premium, at a company that pays Stephen A. Smith $20 million per year. The response from the sports media world was instant. Colleagues, executives, other broadcasters, everyone had an opinion on how ESPN chose to handle it. NBC Sports didn't hold back either, calling out the network for the optics of the whole thing. As one write-up on the situation put it plainly, ESPN's handling of the moment was a Bush League move to fire Clark on the air. And if the concern really was that the news would leak before they could control it, that raises its own question about the company. If they were concerned the news was going to break before they could tell Clark, ESPN has deeper issues when it comes to loose lips. So that's the moment. A guy doing his job on camera in the middle of a segment, and then he's gone. No goodbye to the audience, no on-air acknowledgement. Just silence where a broadcaster used to be, and a story that broke across the internet before the man at the center of it even had time to process what had happened to him. That's the inciting incident. Now here's where it gets complicated, because ESPN wasn't done. This was just the first domino. Ryan Clark wasn't an isolated case. He was the headline of something much larger, a wave of cuts that ESPN had been bracing the industry for since earlier in the year. Front Office Sports had reported in June that the network was bracing for a larger round of cuts associated with the ESPN-NFL network merger, with the cuts expected to affect both on and off-camera personnel. The day after Clark's firing, the rest of the list started rolling in. Big names, names people grew up watching. The Athletic reported that Karl Ravech, who had been with the company since 1993 and had been ESPN's lead play-by-play announcer for its baseball coverage, was being laid off alongside NFL insider Tom Pelissero, just 6 months after ESPN purchased NFL Network. Longtime SportsCenter anchor David Lloyd was let go. So was injury expert Stephania Bell, talk show host Bart Scott, and NFL Network analyst Charles Davis. Longtime SportsCenter anchor David Lloyd, injury expert Stephania Bell, talk show host Bart Scott, and NFL Network analyst Charles Davis were also laid off as well. This is where the Joe Pompliano breakdown becomes important, with ESPN swallowing all NFL Network talent via the recent merger. Think Ian Rappaport, Kyle Brandt, Mike Garofalo. Clark was in no man's land, a highly paid rotational studio analyst, but not a franchise studio star. In other words, the merger flooded ESPN's roster with new NFL Network names doing similar jobs, and Clark was left in the middle. Not cheap enough to keep around as a depth piece, not irreplaceable enough to protect as a franchise face. And the report makes clear, this reaches further than one man's paycheck. This firing goes way beyond Ryan Clark. ESPN's own financials explain why he was let go, why more cuts are coming, and why a $2 million salary became a liability. That contrast says a lot. $20 million for one voice, and a network deciding it can no longer justify $2 million for another. It's not personal in the corporate ledger sense, it's math. But for the man on the other end of that math, it's still his life, his routine, his identity for over a decade. There's also the question of what got Clark specifically flagged before others. He'd had rough patches on air. He has run into some issues with his coworkers. Last September, Clark called out Peter Schrager as a non-player on Get Up, prompting an ugly on-air argument that reportedly continued off-air. Reports pointed to that tension as one of the Threads executives were watching. Clark, who joined ESPN in 2015 after an NFL career and won a Sports Emmy in 2023, had reportedly been under increased scrutiny since February's Super Bowl, with the Athletic reporting tensions with colleague Peter Schrager, including a viral on-air spat last year that had drawn attention from network executives considering letting him go. There was also mention of a pattern of apologies he'd had to issue over the years for on-air comments, feeding into a picture that executives had been keeping tabs on him. Well before that Monday, Clark had to issue multiple public apologies over the last few years and got into an on-air dispute with Peter Schrager last year, and the former NFL player's $2 million salary left him particularly vulnerable. So put it together, a merger that made his role redundant, a salary that made him an easy target on a spreadsheet, and a couple of rocky on-air moments that gave the network a story to point to. That's the storm that hit Ryan Clark on a random Monday afternoon, in the middle of a football segment. But here's the thing about a purge like this. It doesn't just take out one guy. It takes out dozens of people who never had cameras pointed at them. People whose names never trended. People who went home that week without a job and without the platform to say anything about it. That's the part of this story that set up what came next. Less than 24 hours after getting fired in the middle of his own broadcast, Ryan Clark did something that a lot of people in his position wouldn't have done. He didn't go quiet. He didn't lawyer up publicly. He didn't attack the network first. He turned around and spoke to the other people who just lost their jobs alongside him. Tuesday, as the rest of the ESPN layoffs rolled out, Ravech, Pelissero, Lloyd, Bell, Scott Davis, and more, Clark posted on social media. Ryan Clark went to X to share his message, saying, "Sending prayers and love to all those laid off today by ESPN." Then he kept going, speaking directly to what those people were about to walk into. "So many of you have poured your life into that company, and I know how you're feeling right now. My hope is, as this door closes, another opens for you all. God bless." Think about the timing of that. This is a man who less than a day earlier had been sitting in a chair on live television being told his run at the company was over. He hadn't even had 24 hours to sit with it. And instead of using that platform to vent about his own situation, he used it to comfort a room full of people who were about to feel exactly what he just felt. The Sporting News picked up on this too, framing it as Clark leading off a wave of departures, and then turning right back around to support the wave behind him. On Monday evening, news broke that former ESPN analyst Ryan Clark had been let go by the network after more than a decade of work. And the day after his firing, Clark took to social media. and shared a message in support of the ensuing network layoffs. The report noted that even with his own career up in the air, it was unclear how Clark would proceed with his career, but he appeared to remain hopeful about the future. That message didn't stay contained to Clark's own timeline. It rippled outward. Fox News Outkick covered the moment, noting that Clark was wishing others who were laid off by ESPN well, empathizing with those who lost their jobs. The framing across multiple outlets was the same. A man who had every reason to be bitter, choosing instead to extend something close to grace toward the people going through it with him. And the response inside the industry didn't stop with Clark's own words. Other people started weighing in on how ESPN had treated him, and some of the loudest reactions came from names that had been through their own version of this. Don Lemon, who spent years at CNN before his own high-profile exit, posted directly comparing what happened to Clark to what happened to him. On his TikTok, Lemon said, "Imagine getting fired in front of millions of people while you're in the middle of a broadcast. That's what ESPN did to Ryan Clark this week." Lemon didn't stop at sympathy. He went after the mechanics of the decision itself. He said ESPN didn't need to cut Ryan Clark at that exact moment, but they were scared that the story would break online before they got to control the narrative. So instead of calling him on the phone or having a private meeting, they let him find out in the middle of a broadcast. Then he drew the line straight back to his own experience, telling his audience to imagine that happening to them because something close to it had already happened to him. Lemon alluded to his 2023 firing after 17 years with CNN, saying, "I can imagine it happening to me because something very similar happened to me." He spent over 11 years at that network, and Lemon went further than just sympathy for one man. He turned it into a statement about how networks treat the people who built them. Guys who gave this network everything are being treated like disposable items. He said, adding that moments like this are exactly why on-air talent has been drifting toward building their own platforms instead. This kind of stuff is why talent is flocking to independent media and starting their own shows. So within 48 hours, you had Ryan Clark sending love to strangers who just lost their jobs, and you had a former network anchor publicly comparing the moment to one of the more talked about firings in cable news history. That's the shape of the immediate aftermath. Grief, grace, and a chorus of people from outside ESPN saying the quiet part loud. Once Clark's message went out, the response from people who actually knew him, players, coaches, co-workers, started stacking up, and it came from corners of the sports world that don't usually weigh in on media layoffs at all. Travis Kelce, one of the biggest names in the NFL, made a point of showing support for Clark after everything went down. Kansas City Chiefs star tight end Travis Kelce quietly showed support for Ryan Clark after his abrupt firing from ESPN earlier this week. That's notable. A star player at Kelce's level doesn't usually get pulled into a media company's personnel decisions, but this one clearly crossed over into the locker room. Deion Sanders reacted too, once Clark broke his silence about how the whole thing actually happened. Colorado Buffaloes coach Deion Sanders shared his reaction after Ryan Clark addressed being fired from ESPN in the middle of taping an episode of NFL Live. Sanders and Clark have crossed paths for years in football media circles, and Sanders weighing in publicly added another layer to just how far this story traveled outside the walls of ESPN. Then there's the other side of it. Not everyone reacted with sympathy. Nick Bosa, the 49ers star pass rusher, hadn't posted on the platform formerly known as Twitter in 4 years. And the night the news broke, he came back just to react to it. San Francisco 49ers star pass rusher Nick Bosa hadn't posted on X in 4 years, until Thursday evening when Bosa returned to the platform with a subtle reaction to ESPN's decision to part ways with former NFL defensive back and longtime analyst Ryan Clark. That tells you something too. This wasn't a story that only mattered to people who liked Clark. It mattered enough that even someone with friction toward him broke a 4-year silence just to acknowledge it. Inside the building itself, the reaction was more careful, but it was there. Stephen A. Smith, arguably the face of the entire network, spoke about losing Clark as a colleague in personal terms. Smith said, "I don't know all those, brother Ryan Clark, a person that I consider to be arguably the best NFL analyst in America, is no longer a member of ESPN." Smith made clear that even with his own standing at the company, he had no power to stop it. Although he is the network's $100 million man, Smith was powerless to save Clark from being fired. That detail matters. If the highest paid personality at the entire network, someone with an enormous contract and enormous leverage, couldn't do anything to change the outcome, that tells you how far up the decision went and how little room there was for anyone inside the building to push back on it. Clark himself later addressed this directly on his own podcast, pushing back on the idea that Smith could have somehow intervened. He made clear that Smith doesn't actually hold that kind of decision-making power at the network, regardless of how much influence people assume he has. Stephen A., with all of his power, with all of his influence, is not a true decision-maker. At ESPN, Clark said, that's not his job title, right? That's not in the repertoire of what he's asked to do. But Clark also made a point of crediting Smith for believing in him early, saying that when the network was treating him in a way he felt was unfair, as it pertains to what I accomplished, he was the first one to say, "I want you." That will never be forgotten by me. So you've got Kelsey and Sanders showing up for him from the football world, Bosa breaking a years-long silence just to react, and Smith, the biggest name in the building, publicly grieving the loss of a colleague while admitting he had no say in the matter. That's a lot of noise for one Monday afternoon layoff. And Clark hadn't even given his full account yet. A few days after it all happened, Ryan Clark finally sat down and gave his full account, not in a press release, not in a quick post, but on his own show, in front of his own co-hosts, where he didn't have to perform for anyone. It happened on an episode of his Pivot podcast, alongside Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder, and it turned into one of the more emotional moments of his post-ESPN week. Ryan Clark spoke out after his abrupt exit from ESPN, and things got emotional, breaking down in tears while reflecting on his more than a decade-long stay with the worldwide leader during the latest episode of his Pivot podcast. The moment that broke him wasn't a question about ESPN's decision, or the money, or the merger. It was a simple question from his co-host about regret. The waterworks started when Fred Taylor, Ryan's co-host, asked him if there was anything he'd do differently in hindsight, prompting the emotional response. And Clark's answer wasn't about the network at all. It was about the people back home. That's a good question. It depends on when you ask me. When I see people in public, OGs, aunties and stuff, and they tell me they're proud of me, and they're proud of, like Clark said before stopping to collect himself. He kept going, fighting through it, and they're proud of, like, the way I represent the community. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything, 'cause that means the world to me, Clark continued. That answer didn't just get to him. It got to the people sitting across from him too. The answer didn't only have RC fighting back the tears. It also had an impact on Channing Crowder, whose eyes welled up. DeGrio's coverage of that same episode captured what Clark had built over his run at the network, not just the on-air resume, but the moments that stuck with people. In an emotional episode of his Pivot podcast, Clark let all of his emotions out about being let go from ESPN after an on-air career that saw him win multiple Sports Emmy Awards and be hailed for spotlighting former LSU football player Greg Brooks and giving a human aspect to Damar Hamlin's near-death experience on the field. Those aren't just resume lines. Those are the moments where a sports analyst became something closer to a storyteller for people going through the hardest days of their lives. And on the question of how it actually ended, Clark refused to let the softer framing stand. He wanted it on the record that this wasn't some routine budget trim he happened to get swept up in. I wasn't laid off. I was fired, he bluntly said, about the much-reported conversation he had during his final NFL Live appearance. And elsewhere in that same conversation, he was even more direct about the distinction, making clear this wasn't a corporate numbers decision as much as it was personal, coming from people inside the building who simply didn't want him there anymore. Clark made it crystal clear that he wasn't part of corporate layoffs. He was intentionally fired because some of the powers that be didn't like him. That's a heavy thing to say publicly about the company you gave over a decade to, but it lines up with everything that led to this point. The on-air tension with a coworker, the quiet monitoring from executives since the Super Bowl, the salary that made him easy to cut, and the way the news broke to him in the middle of a live broadcast instead of behind closed doors. Where does he go from here? Nobody knows yet, including Clark himself. At the moment, it is unclear how Clark will proceed with his career, but he appears to be remaining hopeful about the future. What is clear is how he chose to walk out the door, not with a lawsuit announcement, not with a scorched earth rant, but with a message to strangers who were about to feel what he just felt. followed days later by tears over what the people in his own community think of him. That's the story of Ryan Clark's exit from ESPN, a firing that happened in front of millions of people, and a response that, in its own way, tried to give something back to the people who didn't have millions of people watching when it happened to them.